Hello, History 1 students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have your notes for Chapter 3, Section 2, Railroads. So, follow along, write down what you need. Here we go. Railroads. They played an important and a major part of linking and uniting our nation. The railroad boom began in the year 1862 with the passage of the Pacific Railway Act. And if you note the year, that is right in the middle of the Civil War. This is an act that President Lincoln signed, but for the most part, it really didn't get much attention until the war years were over. So, we're going to have to wait until about 1865 before much is going to happen. So, the creation of the Transcontinental Railway Act, this allowed Americans the ability to transport goods quickly, encouraged an integrated railway network that made shipping cheaper and more efficient, and united the country from east to west as a more cohesive whole. And the two companies that are going to be kind of up for the task. One happens to be the Central Pacific out of Sacramento, California. The other is the Union Pacific. Union Pacific, a lot of the backers and supporters were from Chicago. And if you note the map that we have over here, there's railways that are already crossing Iowa and Illinois that the Union Pacific is going to link up with. And so it comes as no surprise that these investors would definitely want to use Omaha as kind of a northern hub. When you talk about California, Sacramento isn't very far from where gold was discovered in 1849, and thus being able to get goods to California without having to ship them around the southern tip of South America would certainly be a welcome proposition. So, we are going to have to get started on this. And one of the things that should be said is that with the Transcontinental Railroad going through parts of Nebraska, there was a goal. And as you can see here on the photo, the goal was to lay as much track in one day as possible. And so ultimately, the probably the most productive time was when there was about 10 miles of track being laid each day. Granted, some of this track, it's going to be replaced rather quickly because of the kind of the lack of details that kind of were happening there as far as like grading down the ground and making sure that everything was fastened correctly. But hey, they're in a race. They're trying to get it done. As you can see here, this is a photo that was taken along the Transcontinental Railroad, very close to what would be like Cozad, Nebraska. It's along the 100th meridian, roughly 247 miles from Omaha. And you can kind of see them celebrating there. So, the Union Pacific, they pushed westward from Omaha, Nebraska. Technically, the rail hub was supposed to be Council Bluffs, but that's on the other side of the river. And without having a lot of the resources, they didn't want to build the bridge just yet. And so they just started laying tracks on the Nebraska side. That was started in the year 1865. And many of the laborers that were working on the railroad at this time were Irish. As the war wraps up, there are going to be more Civil War veterans that are going to head westward to kind of work on this endeavor. The Central Pacific, they pushed eastward from Sacramento, California. Their big investors were known as the Big Four. One of them being Leland Stanford. So if you know anything about Stanford University, that's the guy that we're talking about. Anyway, due to labor shortages, this prompted the railroad to hire about 10,000 workers from China. And actually, it was kind of easier to get the workers from China than to put workers from back east on ships, sail them around the Strait of Magellan, and bring them up the coast, the Pacific coast. It'd be a lot easier just to go right to China and get the workers. And so that's what they did. And the fact that the workers from China were doing very dangerous jobs. The Central Pacific went right through the Sierra Nevadas. A lot of the grade that had to be prepared had to be dynamited, and that was very, very dangerous work. Thus, they hired Chinese workers to do that because the story was they had built the Great Wall. They could probably build the railroad. So, the Transcontinental Railroad met at Promontory Summit. This was on April the 10th, 1869, out in Utah, really in the middle of nowhere. And this completed the work on the railroad. In a few years, they're going to add another set of tracks that's going to run parallel, so you can have trains going eastbound and westbound at the same time. The photo that you see there is where the trains come together. On that day, they hammered in a golden spike to kind of celebrate the completion. The spike itself was tied to a telegraph line, and so when the spike was hammered in, it sent a message out on the wires saying that the job was complete. And that was kind of a big celebration as a result of that. So as we have expansion of the railroads, this spurred American industrial growth because the railroads were big consumers of steel, coal, and timber. The development of the railways or railroads also led to the American Railway Association, and they're going to divide the country into 4 time zones to make rail service safer and more reliable. Before the 1880s, each community had set their own clocks by a sun dial or the sun's position at noon. So to actually have any kind of accuracy about like when a train would arrive in a station, we all needed to be on the same clock. And that's kind of the reason why we went ahead and we set up these time zones to make that happen. So, yeah. Even today, we have some states and some counties in some states that kind of opt in and out of some of these time zones based on daylight savings time. And so you see that probably more often in states that are kind of bordering the time zones. So like in Indiana, you have a little bit of that. There's talk that even in our great state of Nebraska, that we would like to opt out of some of the daylight savings. We'll have to see. So the U.S. government gave land grants to the railroad companies to build this railroad. This led to bribery and corruption. And we're gonna have an awfully big scandal that's gonna kind of brew out of this. During the 1850s and 1860s, the federal land grant system awarded railroad companies over 120 million acres of land in the United States. So before the building of the Transcontinental Railroad in the 1860s, if you look at the map, states like Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, probably Arkansas, and down south into Louisiana. I mean, they're receiving some of those grants, Kansas probably. But as we build this Transcontinental Railroad, we're going to amp that up when we're heading westward. Note, up into the Dakota Territory and Montana, the land grants are even bigger. So they're going to be given more right-of-way. Like in Nebraska, it's roughly 20 miles north, 20 miles south. You get into some areas of the Montana Territory, it might have been 50 miles either way that the government's going to give land grants to. So these land grants helped railroad entrepreneurs such as Jay Gould become extremely wealthy. And Jay Gould, I will say this, he was kind of a ruthless guy. He was famous for manipulating stocks and being a very corrupt railroad owner. This is a force to reckon with. But I mean, he's an entrepreneur. He's trying to make a buck. Okay, this wealth led to accusations of swindling, bribery, resulted in many railroad owners being called robber barons. Probably one of the more famous ones is this guy that's in the political cartoon to the right named William Vanderbilt. And note, The political cartoon on the left-hand side, you got one of them robber barons that looks like a big old money bag. And if you look on that, it says Monopoly. And that's kind of what these guys were. They were kind of monopolists. Vanderbilt pretty much controlled all the railroads in the eastern part of the United States. And if you know anything about Central Station that is in New York City, yeah, he's the guy. He's the guy that made that happen. Granted, there were also some other things that they did that was not necessarily so nice, but we'll leave that for another time. Credit Mobilier. This is a scandal that's like right in our backyard. This impacts the Union Pacific Railroad. And unfortunately, there were several members of Congress who bought shares in a construction company called Credit Mobilier, which was, kind of a farce in a sense. And they invested heavily, made a lot of money off of the land. We had future presidents like James Garfield that was involved in this. We also had Vice President Schuyler Colfax also in. We had Ames, who was you're going to have a city in both Iowa and eventually over here in Nebraska. Ames, Nebraska, not very big, but all named after this guy. Okay, so it's unfortunate. Union Pacific almost went bankrupt as a result of the scandal, and when it kind of unwove, the government kind of bailed it out. And the company's with us yet to this day with its headquarters in Omaha, but its beginnings were pretty fragile, and they could have lost it all. So, one of the more successful railroads was the Great Northern Railroad, built by this fellow that you see over here on the right-hand side, James J. Hill. And I have to say, I really like James J. Hill. His railroad did not accept any federal land grants to build. And he operated this railroad kind of on a kind of a way of like trying to prospect. He offered free tickets for people to ride the railroad. He would take them out to show them destinations along the way, and we're talking like the railroad going through parts of North Dakota, parts of Montana, up into places like Seattle and Washington. But this railroad was one of the few that was never forced into bankruptcy. And it is also this railway, when you talk about like the current Amtrak route that kind of goes through that northern part of the United States, it pretty much follows Hill's railroad line. Matter of fact, it's Hill's line that eventually would take people out to Glacier National Park before it became a national park, and kind of led to the building of the huge resorts that were out there, kind of in the early part of the 20th century. So he's quite the entrepreneur, so to speak, kind of a self-made man. So let's cheer for him. All right, thank you very much.